weren't meant for that purpose, but they won't make the jump to Access because they can't see it. Excel, they can, so older managers can trace and walk through it, but
Yeah,
they can't see it. So that lack of visibility, they won't make the.
that's right. You
That's
can't
jump.
see the internals.
That doesn't sound like an irrational bias.
Affinity is not an irrational bias.
I mean, the specific example of staying with Excel because I can see it,
Mhm.
there's a benefit there.
There is, yeah.
That's not.
Until your 70 meg spreadsheet crashes.
Well,
the spreadsheet catches fire.
Okay, you are looking at one particular. You're looking at one particular benefit, and you are not looking at risk.
So I would say that almost every aversion or bias has some element of benefit. The question is, have you reached a point where what you were doing before has to move into some? Have you gone from paper punch card to magnetic tape? Magnetic tape has a lot of risk associated with it. There are many reasons to stick with punch cards, but are you getting to a point where you are leaving Excel spreadsheets and have to go to Access? I don't know in this gentleman's example, but there are times when you have to go from control to release. You have to go from something I have visibility into to something that helps me get my job done. It's when you deal with the bias, is the bias something that you should be working to try and disabuse somebody of? Or is it something that you have to say, that's a requirement? This person's going to need the visibility into this. So I don't know the circumstances, but that's a great point. So you have to work with every aversion and bias from a position of understanding, not from a position of scorn or ridicule. Anybody help any?
We've got tons of reports that are out that they're really just in the same form of the paper version that they were. It's probably been 15 years since they've been a paper version.
Yeah.
Down to the point that fonts and spacing are all based on the fact that they could take that printed report and photograph it correctly.
Yeah.
And none of that happens anymore. It's all computerized. But the reports can't change because they have to stay the same.
They're sticking with the same old because that's the way it was on paper. Yeah.
Do you have any of those green bar reports?
I love
Just like
mine.
in Access that you can create a green bar report.
You can put them in. Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
I lost my clicker. Oh well. Did I set that down somewhere? I must have. So,
Over there in the back.
yeah, I put it in my bag. Thank you. We're gonna edit that out of the YouTube video.
So, what are our thoughts on the technology of page numbers?
I don't know that we can address all of those things. I think what we can do is we can say, when you have a situation where the outcomes are unknown, right? When you're looking at that, say, okay, we are going to. I think this example of the reports is a hard one, where you're really just saying, I can make your report so much better. I can make it a drill down report. I can give you all this thing. And everybody says, no, just stick with what I've always had. That can be very limited, right? I think when you look at page numbering, we can say, well, there's a certain human need to have some way to reference and say, I'm looking at the 32nd page.
Let's take a quick survey. Who here would be willing to give up page numbers on their computer-generated reports?
For what benefit?
Well, they're not useful anymore.
I would give them up.
You would give them up
I would.
because on today's systems, the pagination depends on the size of my screen.
Sure,
Even an ebook, I can change the size of the font.
that's right.
As long as I have access to a line number or something else that I
What's
can
the
call somebody
point
else and
of
say, look
having-
at this line.
What's the point of having page numbers if, when I set my font to this, I'm on page 5, but you set your font to something else and you're on
That's right.
page 3, but we're looking at the same data.
That's right.
So who here is willing to give up page numbers?
I think
But
page number in and of itself may not be useful, but in my mind, when I'm looking at reports, I'm looking for page 1 of X, which gives you an indicator of, I'll say, amount of reading.
That's useful. That is useful. How far into this am I? How much further do I have to go?
So that would be the value of a page number. A page number just by itself, I agree, it's no longer relevant.
Would you be happy with a percentage instead of a page?
Percentage.
Yes, because it's, part of that gets back to, again, your point, if I change that stuff, my total page count is going to change too, right? But so I'm actually thinking of a percentage.
You're trying to translate numbering into percentage.
Yeah. You know, what's my ratio of completed to overall kind of thing?
At the risk of being labeled a Luddite, when I read books on Kindle, the one thing I really miss is page numbers. In fact, I sometimes go to Amazon to look at the table of contents of the printed version of the book to figure out where I am in terms of pages. Because I just have this intuitive understanding that if I've got 500 pages to go, I got this much to go. Whereas the Kindle has, like, you are at point X of 500, of some fat massive number of points, and I just have no mental map of what that means.
But doesn't it also give you the percentage?
Yeah, it does give me a percentage, but I don't find that as satisfying.
Yeah,
as
it's knowing, yeah.
And of course, if you
It gives you the page number, it gives you how many pages are in it, it gives you the percentage. And, I mean,
There are some things you actually, I just went through this with my wife at Christmas time. I got her Kindle, and she really liked it for about an hour, and then she goes, I have no idea what page I'm on. And she said it in this way, it was my fault. So I actually went on to Amazon support and found out how I could get her the virtual page or the percentage, and then she was fine with it. She said, as long as I don't have to tell anyone else what page I'm on, and I know how far I am, I'm fine. But that was not the default setting for the Kindle to tell you how far along you were. It told you how much longer you had in reading time, which sort of bases it how much time you spent on it per page. But of course, we got 2 kids running around. It's Christmas time, so her page rate was like 10 minutes per page. She says, I know it's not going to take me 3 years to read this book. So.
the technical material might have a much slower
Read rate. Right.
You actually want to be able to refer to page numbers to let other people know where particular passages.
But that's the problem we have with the electronic media. My page number isn't your page number anymore.
It should be.
it still is. You can change the font on the Kindle,
But-
and the number of pages.
But then each screen is not a page.
You're on page 37A. I'm on
suppose
page
you-
37C.
Suppose you open it up on Kindle on your iPad compared to on your iPhone.
But I think the point we've proven is that there is utility in page numbers, right?
Fixed number of pages.
I think it depends on the media.
I think page,
Like words, use of page numbers is different, so.
there's a strong correlation between page number and progress, right? In what you're saying. For other people who have never relied on page number, they have other measures of progress. And I think that's.
So I bring the example of page numbers up so that we can consider our own biases.
Yeah. I had an argument with a kindergarten teacher who insisted that my daughter needs to learn how to tie her shoelace. And I said, why? Velcro, right?
Right.
I mean, you know, we don't teach her how to read a sundial. We don't, I mean, where's the limits here? Are you going to tell me she has to learn how to read an analog clock? You know, there are just certain things that have become anachronistic, are becoming anachronistic, and yeah.
So let me look at that for a second. It depends if the intent is to be able to fasten her shoes in an anachronistic fashion, right?
Yes.
But the dexterity and the things that you learn from tying your shoes and be able to, I can see my own son.
Right. So it was a
certain
fine
things
motor skill.
Give the girl a tablet, she'll
Then
overrun all
good.
of
You're
us.
teaching her a fine motor skill. If you are teaching her how to tie her shoes, say, well, she doesn't have those shoes, so we obviously should give her an exemption.
And if you don't teach people how to read a clock, how do they know which direction clockwise is?
That's right.
You get an app for that now.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we definitely have these biases, and these biases get us into arguments. I've had arguments over manual testing. People wanted to stay with manual testing. I tried to say, no, let's not do it that way. I've been on other projects where doing manual builds. No! And I said, let's not do it that way. Let's do an automated build.
Yeah, actually, one of my staff members for years before I even took over the team, she has done daily manual tests of all our public-facing sites. And today, I sent her an email because I came across, I was doing some stuff with JavaScript, and I came across this tool called Nightwatch.js, which is just that. It's for automating all your processes. So that's kind of good timing on that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm constantly dealing with that.
Well, I worked, in my consulting work, I worked with a team at a client, and I was helping the QA testers automate their testing. And we went through a process, and we were automating our testing. And this has been about 3 or 4 months, and the QA lead came over to my cube, and she was really upset. She goes, Stephen, we gotta stop this. We gotta stop this now. And I was like, well, what's wrong? And she's going, it's a disaster. And I just was like, what's a disaster? The whole automated testing. And so we started talking about it. And you see, all of the testers, the QA testers, had been measured on how many defects they wrote per day. That was their measure of productivity. And see, what happened was the developers had found that they could run the suite of automated tests on another server. So they had brought it all, and they were running. So what they would do is they would check in their code, and then they would run the suite of QA tests, and it would find the bugs that they had introduced. So they would go fix them, and then when the suite would run on the test servers at night, in the morning there would be no bugs. Well, this had been going on for weeks. And now the managers were like, your QA testers are not writing any bugs. What are they doing all day? And so it turned out that I needed to go to the management team and say, what we are doing is something known as test coverage. And what we're doing is every feature that you have over here now has tests. And what we're going to talk about is how do we measure productivity with number of automated tests written and the amount of coverage, and let's talk about the complexity of the code, and let's talk about quality and how we're getting higher levels of quality and problem prevention rather than problem detection and that type of thing.
So the QA team manager, their original purpose was to identify and record defects. And by automating tests, and developers being nefarious folks they are, running these tests on the side, that took away the QA team's purpose.
Their purpose was to detect the defects that were in the code before the product was shipped. That was their entire purpose. And one of the ways you could measure their effectiveness was to see, ooh, they found a lot, the quality must be going, it's ready to ship. And what they were seeing was that at the beginning it went like this, and then it just went to 0. And it was like nothing, they weren't even reporting a few of them. It was flatline, nada, zilch, 0. That was obviously a problem. Because
So, I don't know if the purpose changed so much as obviously the choice in the metric or the means by which, you know, as you were saying, productivity. So I'm thinking back to that shoelace thing that said, okay, if it's about fastening the shoe, now we don't need to worry about tying the shoe. But if it's about learning dexterity, that's a different thing. So in this case, you gotta just relook at what's the measure of productivity? What's the thing that I'm trying to get at? So I think that's some of the challenges that this type of stuff introduces, and it makes it, that's part emotional, part psychological, the difficulty of dealing with that.
The shift in thinking, because I really think it was a shift in thinking, was that manual testing to automated testing took us from problem detection to problem prevention. The QA testing team was now preventing the problems from getting into the test server. It was also typically when a developer, a programmer finds a bug in their own code. So if I'm sitting there writing code and I find a bug in my own code, what is the first thing I do with that bug? Fix it. Do I go over to the defect tracking system and write it up with steps to reproduce? Right. Do I make sure it goes to managers to be triaged? Right. So QA testing was saving the organization massive amounts of managerial work. It didn't have to be recorded, it didn't have to be tracked, it didn't have to be triaged, it didn't have to be verified. Prioritized, homogenized, everything they do with defects. Right? All of that went away. Right? And that's all down on the automated testing side. Right? Especially since the developers had it hooked up to continuous integration, which means as soon as they checked it in, it auto-magically came back and told them, oops, you broke something. Right? So it's that change in thinking. It was dramatic and very disruptive. And I was shocked at the point at which somebody was really saying, let's rip it back out. Let's get rid of it. It's causing problems. The same with manual builds and automated builds. I experienced this recently on a project. Joined the project. And I'm the Scrum Master, and one of the developers is going to be going on paternity leave. I'm like, great. Well, I find out after he goes on paternity leave, he's the only one who knows how to do the builds and deployment. I should have. It turns out that his wife's pregnancy had a false, she had to get rushed to the hospital. It turned out to be
false labor.
It wasn't false labor, but it was something that caused her to go on bed rest. And anyway, the result was we learned early enough that there were a few days where we needed to say, wait a second, why don't we have an automated build and deployment? And so when he came back, it's the first thing I said, you're going to need to focus on this. And it was done as a continuous deployment to a dev environment. And nobody even talks about builds and deployments anymore. They happen like that. And it's not even a concern. And when his wife had her baby, he went on paternity leave for 6 weeks. We could leave him alone. Everything was fine. But those are the types of things that the affinity bias, the other one, manual configuration over scripts. I see this happening a lot with systems engineering, cybersecurity, and developers. Apparently, developers like this idea of creating puppet scripts and chef scripts, right? What are these things, right? What are scripts, right? Why don't we just go and change all the ports by hand? Oops, let's go change the ports by hand again. There are lots of affinity towards, I can go out. For me, I have a hard time distinguishing the hardware stuff. I was a Microsoft certified system engineer years ago, and back then we had the KVM switch. That was the virtual machine. Right? That's how you virtually went from one machine to another. Today, there's just so much more in there, and I've really been focusing on the development side of the house. But what I want to make you aware of is these decisions oftentimes get made because of affinity biases. And final integration over continuous integration used to be nothing like integrating at the last minute. A lot of fun times there. And apparently this happens a lot less. But I remember when I was a technical lead, one of the things I used to do is integrate in the morning. Every morning come in and I'd be the one to pull everything together. And today it's all continuously happening. So what I find is that the affinity bias has basically 3 levels to it that you want to focus on. Is knowledge, skill, and attitude. Right? People often don't know what to do, so they don't want to do something new, or they don't know how to do it, or they don't understand why they would want to do it. They have no motivation behind it. And so usually what I'll do is I'll focus it on this level. Oh, you don't want to do an automated build? Do you know what an automated build is all about? Do you know how to write an automated build script? And then you focus on, well, why do we want to do an automated build? Sometimes you get to the point where people say, yeah, I know what it is and how to do it, but I don't want to do it. I don't like scripting things out. I don't like, automagical things. I like to be able to do it myself. And that's where you really start to say, well, for the best of the team, we want to make sure that when you go on paternity leave, the rest of us don't sit here and scramble. But this is a lot of things that technical leads coach on, project managers need to coach on. And the reason I do it on this sequence is sometimes people say, I don't want to do it because they don't know how to do it. Or they say, I don't want to do it because they don't know what it is, right? For me, somebody said, do Puppet. I'd be like, I don't want to do Puppet, right? But it's probably because I don't really know how to do it. So a lot of things to focus on. Tutorials and trial periods. Key things are measuring value. Oftentimes problem prevention versus problem detection has a lot more value. Just explain 5 minutes the cost difference between a developer finding their own bug and QA finding their bug. Right there you can get a lot of dollar and cents discussion. Talk about another cognitive bias here. The Dunning-Kruger effect is one that a lot of gamers probably hear something about, right? Some people can wildly overestimate their relative competence, right?